The first thing she realized was that fear had a sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. The steady thud of her heart against her ribs as she stood inside a room that smelled of expensive leather, cold steel, and absolute power. Elena Carter had never imagined her life would narrow down to this moment, standing across from a man whose name alone could silence cities. Outside, the rain hit the tall glass windows like a warning she was too late to heed. Inside, the Mafia Boss watched her with an unreadable expression, calm, controlled, terrifyingly patient. And before she could understand how her world had collapsed so quickly, he spoke the words that changed everything. "This is not a request," he said quietly. "This is a contract." 2 hours earlier, Elena had still believed she was in control of her life. She was smart, independent, and careful, a woman who planned everything 2 steps ahead. She had come to the city to finalize a business deal on behalf of her struggling family company, unaware that the signature she was trying to save had already been manipulated behind closed doors. What she hadn't known, what they had never told her, was that her father's debt wasn't financial anymore. It was personal. And in a world ruled by men like Adrian DeLuca, personal debts were paid in blood, loyalty, or lifelong obedience. Adrian DeLuca didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stood behind his desk in a perfectly tailored black suit, his presence heavy and unyielding, eyes dark with power earned through fear and precision. The city bowed to him without ever seeing his face, and tonight, Elena understood why. There was no chaos in him, no wasted energy. Every movement was intentional, every word sharpened by consequence. When he placed the contract folder on the table between them, it felt heavier than paper should ever feel. "Your father owes me a life-altering debt," he said evenly. "One that can't be repaid in money." Elena's breath trembled as she opened the folder. Her eyes scanned page after page, her hands growing cold with every word. Marriage, 5 years, legal binding, confidentiality clauses, no escape, no refusal. Her vision blurred. "You can't be serious," she whispered, shaking her head. "You can't force." Adrian stepped closer then, cutting the distance with terrifying ease. "I can, and I am." There was no pleasure in his tone, no cruelty, only certainty. That frightened her more than anger ever could. She tried to argue. She tried logic, reason, desperation. She spoke of consent, of law, of morality, but none of those concepts had weight in his world. "This marriage protects your family," Adrian said quietly. "Your father's debt disappears. Your mother's safety is guaranteed. Your younger brother walks free." His eyes locked onto hers. "Or I walk away, and so do my protections." The silence that followed was unbearable. Elena felt something inside her fracture, the realization that love, choice, and freedom were luxuries she could no longer afford. Her voice broke when she spoke again. "Why me?" Adrian's gaze shifted just for a moment, something unreadable flickering beneath his composed exterior. "Because you can endure this, and because I don't marry out of weakness, I marry out of necessity." The words hit her harder than any threat. This wasn't about desire. This wasn't about romance. This was strategy, control, survival. Minutes later, though it felt like years, her signature marked the final page. The sound of pen against paper echoed through the massive office like a verdict. Elena Carter was no longer free. Adrian DeLuca was now her husband on paper, a stranger with power over her life and the lives of everyone she loved. As she stood there, numb and hollow, Adrian closed the folder and met her gaze with something almost solemn. "You are under my protection now. That includes from me, as long as you don't forget what this marriage is." As guards escorted her out into the rain-soaked night, Elena realized the cruel truth of her situation. She wasn't entering a fairy tale. She wasn't marrying a savior. She had been down to a man whose world thrived on fear, secrecy, and bloodless contracts that destroyed lives quietly. And somewhere deep within her chest, beneath the terror and disbelief, another realization took root. This forced marriage would either break her completely or awaken something neither of them expected. Far above the city, Adrian stood alone by the window, watching the rain fall. His expression remained controlled, but his jaw tightened just slightly. The contract marriage was done, necessary, strategic, And yet, as Elena's car disappeared into the night, a thought crossed his mind that unsettled him more than any rival ever could. This woman was not weak, and forcing her into his world might prove to be the most dangerous decision of his life. Elena arrived at the DeLuca estate before dawn, when the city was still half asleep and the sky hovered between night and morning. The mansion stood on elevated ground, isolated yet commanding, its iron gates sliding open in silent submission to Adrian's authority. As the car moved up the long, curved driveway, Elena stared through the window, absorbing every detail: the towering stone walls, the discreet presence of armed guards, the sense that this was not a house but a fortress built to keep danger out and secrets in. The moment she stepped inside, she understood that this place was governed by rules she did not yet know, and breaking even one could cost her far more than comfort. The staff greeted her with practiced respect, using her new title with ease, Mrs. DeLuca. Each time she heard it, her chest tightened, the reality of the contract fastening itself tighter around her heart. The mansion was immaculate, elegant to the point of intimidation. Everything gleamed with control. Nothing felt lived in. It mirrored Adrian perfectly, precise, commanding, untouchable. A house built for power, not affection. As a housekeeper escorted her to the East Wing, her designated living quarters, Elena noted another detail that unsettled her. Adrian was nowhere to be seen. His absence felt deliberate, as though even distance was a form of domination. Hours passed before she finally saw him again. Adrian entered the dining room without announcement, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his presence instantly settling the room into silence. Elena sat at the long table alone, an untouched plate in front of her. When he took a seat across from her, the distance between them felt both vast and claustrophobic. "There are rules," he said, calmly, pouring himself a drink. "This marriage exists for the world, not for sentiment. You will appear with me at public events, you will not interfere with my business, and you will not attempt to leave the estate without clearance." Elena bristled, her fingers tightening against her lap. "And in return?" she asked quietly. Adrian met her gaze. "In return, your family remains untouched." The cold finality of his words ignited something fierce inside her. She had expected intimidation, perhaps even humiliation, but this calm removal of emotion, it felt far more dangerous. Elena lifted her chin, a quiet defiance burning in her eyes. "I may be bound by that contract," she said, voice steady, "but I won't become invisible." Something shifted then, a subtle tightening of Adrian's jaw, the faintest flicker of interest crossing his gaze. "You will survive here," he replied. "How you do it is your choice." Days blurred together into a rhythm that felt unnatural. Elena learned the routines of the mansion, memorized the silent protocols, observed the guards and staff who treated her with polite caution rather than warmth. She was allowed access to most areas, but certain doors were always locked, certain corridors always guarded. The house itself spoke of power, maintained through boundaries. She noticed how servants stiffened when Adrian entered a room, how conversations died instantly in his presence. And yet, despite the cold exterior, Elena sensed that he watched her closely. Not intrusively, but deliberately. She was being assessed, measured, studied. One evening, she broke her first unspoken rule. Elena wandered toward the private library, a space clearly marked off limits. The temptation hadn't been impulsive. It had been deliberate, a test of how far the contract extended into her autonomy. Inside, the scent of leather-bound books and history thickened the air. She had barely stepped inside when Adrian's voice cut through the silence. "You're not meant to be in here." She turned slowly, meeting his gaze across the room. "I didn't see a rule that said I couldn't read,"
she replied calmly. Adrian stepped closer, his presence filling the space. Rules don't need to be written when they are understood. The tension between them sharpened into something almost tangible. Elena refused to back down, her spine straight, her expression unflinching. "Then understand this," she said quietly. "I won't live like a prisoner." The words hung between them, daring him to respond. Instead of anger, something unexpected surfaced. Restraint. "You are not a prisoner," he said slowly. "You are a responsibility." The word unsettled her far more than any threat. He turned away, allowing her to leave, a small, silent victory that left her heart racing. That night, Elena lay awake in the massive guest suite, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. The silence pressed in on her, heavy with unanswered questions. She wondered how many women had walked these halls before her, bound by power and silence. She wondered how a man like Adrian DeLuca had learned to remove emotion so completely from his voice, his actions, his life. And despite herself, she wondered something far more dangerous. What lay beneath the control? Across the mansion, Adrian stood alone on the balcony outside his office, city lights flickering below. He replayed the day's interactions with clinical precision. Her refusal to look away, her controlled defiance, the way she spoke not as a victim, but as an equal challenging him. This marriage was meant to be simple, strategic, temporary. And yet, Elena Carter was not fitting neatly into the space he had prepared for her. She wasn't breaking, she wasn't pleading, she was adapting. For the first time since the contract had been signed, Adrian felt the rare and unwelcome stir of uncertainty. He had forced her into his world to control chaos, but instead, he had introduced a force he couldn't yet predict. Elena wasn't attempting escape. She wasn't attacking his authority. She was quietly resisting it, pushing at the edges without ever crossing the line. And Adrian knew, with unsettling clarity, that this kind of woman was far more dangerous than one who simply obeyed. By the end of part 2, their marriage remained cold and contractual, built entirely on silence, power, and obligation. But beneath the surface, something had begun to shift. Lines were being tested, boundaries were flexing, and in a mansion ruled by control, two strong wills had begun a collision course neither of them could ignore.
The first time Elena stepped into public as Mrs. DeLuca, the weight of the name felt heavier than any gown she wore. The event was held in an opulent ballroom overlooking the city, a gathering designed less for celebration and more for silent declarations of power. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors, and the air hummed with wealth, danger, and unspoken alliances. As Elena stood beside Adrian at the entrance, her fingers trembling slightly against his arm, she realized that this was not just a performance. It was a message. Every glance in the room measured her value, her obedience, her worth in relation to the man beside her. Adrian moved with effortless authority, greeting powerful figures with calm dominance, his every gesture calculated. To his rivals, this event was proof of stability, of continuity, of control. The wife at his side was armor as much as symbol. Elena understood this the moment his hand settled lightly at the small of her back, a practiced intimacy meant for the watching world. The touch sent a jolt through her, not of affection, but of warning. Stay close. Don't falter. She lifted her chin, matching his composure, learning in real time how to wear power without letting it consume her. Whispers followed her wherever she walked. She caught fragments of speculation and curiosity. Who is she? Why now? Faces smiled politely, eyes sharp with calculation. Elena quickly learned how dangerous curiosity could be here. A misplaced word, a hesitation too visible, and she would become a vulnerability her enemies could exploit. So, she mirrored Adrian's calm, responding with measured grace, refusing to reveal fear. And somewhere between forced smiles and formal pleasantries, she felt something shift. Not comfort, but capability. During the evening, a woman approached them, elegantly dressed, her gaze locked onto Adrian with a familiarity that stirred something sharp and uncomfortable in Elena's chest. "It's been a long time, Adrian," the woman said smoothly. His response was courteous but distant. "Isabella," he acknowledged. The name lingered like a quiet challenge. Elena understood immediately. This was someone from his past, someone who knew the man behind the title. For reasons she refused to analyze, the encounter unsettled her more than the danger around them. Adrian's hand tightened slightly at her back, a reminder that tonight she was playing a role, his wife. Later, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the glittering city, Isabella's presence still shadowed Elena's thoughts. She found her voice sharper than intended. "Does your world always come with ghosts?" she asked quietly. Adrian met her gaze, something guarded flickering behind his eyes. "Everything comes with history," he replied. "Learning which parts matter is the key to survival." Elena nodded, though the answer felt incomplete. She realized then that this marriage was not only a contract built on obligation, it was a collision of pasts and futures, none of them clean. The evening took a darker turn when Elena sensed eyes lingering too long, conversations pausing at their approach. Adrian noticed as well. He leaned toward her, his voice barely audible. "Stay close to me," he murmured. "Tonight isn't just about appearances." She didn't ask why. The steady tension in his voice told her enough. Danger moved differently in rooms like this, quietly, politely, and without warning. As the night wore on, Elena proved herself in ways even she hadn't anticipated. When questioned directly by a prominent rival's wife, she answered with calm intelligence, neither defensive nor revealing. Adrian noticed, a flicker of approval crossing his expression before he masked it. She realized then that she wasn't merely surviving this performance, she was mastering it. Not through submission, but through perception. Their departure was abrupt. Adrian guided her through a side exit, his grip firm but protective. The drive back to the estate unfolded in tense silence, broken only when Elena finally spoke. "Was tonight meant to protect me, or protect you?" Adrian considered the question carefully. "Both," he said at last. It was the most honest answer he had given her yet. Back at the mansion, the house felt different. Less like a cage, more like a battlefield cleared after combat. In the quiet hallway, Elena turned to face him. "If I'm going to wear this mask," she said firmly, "I need to know what I'm protecting." Adrian studied her, then nodded once. "You're learning faster than I expected. And that makes you valuable." The word valuable should have offended her. Instead, it echoed with something deeper. Recognition. This marriage was still cold, still forced, still bound by control. Yet beneath the surface, mutual respect had taken root in dangerous soil. Elena had proved she could stand beside him in a world built on power and perception. And Adrian, against his intentions, had begun to see her not as leverage, but as a force.
The shift began quietly, the way danger always did in Adrian DeLuca's world. It started with a glance from his head of security, a pause in daily routines, subtle changes Elena sensed before they were explained. The mansion's gates closed earlier than usual, guards doubled at entrances, conversations stopped when she entered rooms. The illusion of calm had fractured. Elena understood instinctively. The moment she became visible beside Adrian, she became exposed. The confirmation came in the form of a warning Adrian received late one night. Elena overheard raised voices through the corridor, restrained but urgent. When Adrian finally entered their shared living space, his expression was carved from stone. "You're no longer attending anything unannounced," he said flatly.
No solo movements, no exceptions. The command stung, but beneath it was urgency, fear sharpened into control. Elena crossed her arms. "Someone threatened me," she stated, refusing uncertainty. Adrian hesitated only a second before answering. "They tested us. That's how this begins." From that moment, Elena was escorted everywhere, watched always. What once felt like imprisonment now carried a darker weight, exposure. She noticed unfamiliar cars parked too long near the estate perimeter, shadows where none should linger. The fear grew slowly, not as panic, but as awareness. Her life was no longer just her own. It had become leverage, and the realization that someone else could decide her safety lit a fire beneath her calm exterior. Adrian's demeanor changed as well. The detached man she'd married under obligation now watched her with constant vigilance. His attention lingered, not possessively, but protectively. He corrected guards who stood too close, altered routes without explanation, placed himself subtly between her and open spaces. She saw it not as dominance, but instinct, raw and unfiltered. The man who commanded fear had learned vulnerability, and she was its cause. One evening, as tensions peaked, Elena nearly slipped through the cracks. A call arrived requesting her presence in the estate's east wing, a routine instruction she'd learned not to question. Only something in the timing unsettled her. She paused, trusting instinct over obedience, and turned back. Moments later, alarms erupted, a breach intercepted where she would have been standing minutes earlier. Adrian found her in the corridor, his composure shattered. For the first time, she saw fear unmasked in his eyes. He pulled her into his arms without thinking, the movement sharp and urgent. For a brief second, she froze, and then she didn't pull away. His heartbeat thundered beneath her cheek, fast and uncontrolled. When he finally released her, his voice was low, strained. "You don't move unless I know where you are." Not as a command this time, as a plea. Elena met his gaze. "Then stop treating me like a liability. I survived tonight because I paid attention." The argument that followed wasn't loud. It was precise, words sharpened by truth. Elena demanded transparency. Adrian resisted, not through secrecy, but fear. He admitted dangers he'd never had to explain before, enemies who would hurt her simply to wound him. And in revealing that, he revealed something more dangerous. She mattered, not as collateral, not as a symbol, but as something irreplaceable. That night marked a turning point neither could ignore. The contract still existed, untouched in ink, but something unseen rewrote its rules. Adrian began sharing fragments of his world, decisions, risks, truths. Elena listened, questioned, learned. Protection became collaboration, control shifted toward trust, and with that trust came tension neither was prepared to confront, the kind that blurred lines and created longing where none had been permitted. As threats closed in from unseen directions, Elena realized she was no longer just being protected, she was being chosen. And Adrian, against every instinct that had kept him alive this long, was doing the unthinkable, placing his greatest weakness at the center of his guarded world. The dangers escalated faster than either of them anticipated, no longer lurking behind shadows, but striking with calculated precision. Attacks came not as open assaults, but as silent warnings, intercepted messages, compromised allies, and betrayals from within Adrian's own trusted circle. The mafia world he ruled with cold strategy had turned unstable, and at its center was Elena. She felt it in the way air thickened around her, in the way servants avoided eye contact, and in the way Adrian no longer slept more than a few hours at night. He carried the weight alone, believing distance was his armor, yet every step he took away from her unraveled him further. When the first real attempt on her life occurred, it shattered the illusion of control completely.
A convoy meant to escort them to a secure location was compromised, forcing Adrian to reroute through unfamiliar territory. Gunfire never reached her. His men intercepted it within seconds, but the fear did. Elena's body reacted before her mind could process it. Adrian shielded her instinctively, pulling her close as chaos erupted around them. His arms closed around her not as protection alone, but as desperation. In that moment, she felt something shift irrevocably. She was no longer the reason for danger. She was the reason he was afraid. Afterward, the tension between them became impossible to ignore. The distance he once maintained fractured into brief, unguarded moments, lingering gazes, unfinished sentences, and hands brushing where neither pulled away. Adrian tried to retreat behind authority, issuing orders sharper than necessary, but Elena saw through it. She confronted him one night, her voice steady but eyes burning. "You can't protect me by pretending I don't matter," she said. The truth hit harder than any threat. Adrian didn't answer at first. When he did, the words were stripped bare. "If something happens to you, I won't survive it." That confession dismantled everything the contract marriage was built upon. Elena realized that love hadn't grown quietly, it had fought its way through fear, walls, and control. Yet loving him meant stepping fully into his war. When intelligence surfaced, revealing that the chaos was orchestrated by rivals intent on using her as leverage, Adrian made a decision that tore them apart. He arranged for Elena to be sent away, hidden under new identities beyond even his reach. He framed it as strategy, but both knew it was sacrifice. Elena refused at first, accusing him of choosing power over partnership. He responded with honesty sharper than force. "I'm choosing you," he said, "even if you hate me for it." Their farewell was restrained, not dramatic, heavier because of what went unsaid. No promises, no declarations. Just the understanding that this separation could be permanent. Elena left knowing she was no longer someone forced into his life, she was someone he would dismantle an empire to save. Alone and hidden, she wrestled with the cost of loving a man built for war. Meanwhile, Adrian unleashed himself fully upon those who dared threaten her, stripping rivals of influence with ruthless precision. His empire trembled under his own fury, yet every move carried restraint, because she had changed him, and destruction no longer brought peace. Time passed painfully slow, each day stretching loyalty and longing thinner. Elena learned strength she never asked for, while Adrian learned patience he never possessed. The distance clarified everything the contract never defined. By the end of this chapter, one truth was undeniable. The marriage was no longer forced, and it was no longer safe. Love had taken root, and now it demanded something far greater than obedience or protection. It demanded choice. And as fate tightened its grip, both Elena and Adrian sensed the same approaching storm. One final confrontation that would decide whether love could survive a world designed to destroy it.
The end came not with gunfire alone, but with truth, sharp, undeniable, and final. Adrian's enemies made their last move when they realized fear no longer controlled him. They targeted what remained vulnerable: information. A deception spread quickly through underground networks that Elena had betrayed him, that she was the weakness he'd misjudged. It was a calculated lie meant to fracture him before the final strike. But this time, Adrian did not react with rage. He waited. And in waiting, he proved he had changed entirely. Elena learned of the lie in silence, hidden far from the chaos, protected but isolated. Yet freedom without choice had become another prison. When evidence reached her that Adrian was walking into a trap meant to end his empire once and for all, she made the same decision he once made for her. She returned. Not as his possession, not as his shield, but as his equal. Her arrival fractured the carefully arranged battlefield. Adrian saw her across the room, and for the first time since he'd known her, he lost control openly. Fear, anger, relief, all collided at once. I sent you away to keep you alive, he said quietly. Elena met his gaze, unwavering. You taught me survival, now trust me. The confrontation that followed changed the course of everything. Allies revealed themselves. Enemies fell not through bloodshed but exposure, their power dismantled in daylight, rather than darkness. Adrian chose restraint, where once he'd chosen annihilation. Elena stood beside him, not hidden, not silent, her presence rewriting the rules he'd lived by. The Empire survived, but transformed. When the dust settled, silence replaced tension. In that stillness, Adrian made his final decision. He destroyed the contract publicly, tearing through the legal chains that had once bound them. You were never mine by force, he said, his voice steady, but filled with emotion he no longer concealed. And I won't keep you by fear. The moment held its breath. Elena stepped forward, her voice calm but powerful. Then let me choose you. Their union no longer belonged to shadows or obligation. It became something rare and dangerous, voluntary love in an unforgiving world. Adrian relinquished the title that demanded distance and cruelty, reshaping his power into protection, not rooted in domination, but partnership. Elena did not soften him. She revealed who he could be without fear ruling every choice. In the end, it wasn't the Mafia empire that defined their story. It was the contract that failed to contain love. What began with coercion ended with freedom, and in a world built on control, their choice to stand together without chains became the most dangerous act of all. As the gates closed behind them, not as prison bars, but as boundaries they chose, one truth echoed louder than gunfire ever had. Love, chosen freely, was the strongest power either of them had ever known.